I've been talking a lot about AI recently with people, particularly now that I've started a new podcast called the AI Powered Thought Leader. And part of the reason why I created that was to bring people over and bring the discussion about AI over there so that I wouldn't be talking about it here on the Recognized Authority. In fact, I explicitly said to my friend Al McBride when I invited him on the podcast, I said, let's not talk about AI. Let's talk about something different. Let's talk about publishing and the different content formats. So without further ado, here is today's episode of The Recognized Authority.
Welcome to The Recognized Authority, a podcast that helps specialized consultants and domain experts on your journey to become known as an authority in your field. Here is your host, Alastair McDermott.
And today, my partner in thought crime is Alastair McBride. Alastair, we had a cool episode planned. At least I had a cool episode planned for today that was not going to be about AI, and you came along and swung a sledgehammer at it.
Sorry, I kind of accidentally torpedoed that.
Like talking about the different platforms, formats of content that we can create as experts and as people who want to be seen as thought leaders. You know, we want to put our thoughts out there, package it up in some format.
Exactly, and I think we should still talk about that. But this is where the conversation took an interesting twist. Because I had immediate surprise where I said, without being too blunt and rude, does anyone care about this anymore? In the sense of, and that's why I mean overly rude, but that's how we're being. But in the sense that, is this not a setup once and forget that you do one, for example, podcast, and then you zap here to some other to create the blog posts? So yes, I want to know how to do all that process, but is it largely not automated once you do set that up once? And that's a powerful process. I can see the value totally. But it's not like it was 5 years ago where you or your VA or whatever had to do each single step on your own.
Okay. My reaction to that, I'm just thinking about what you're talking about there. So you're talking about the very fine-tuned detail of, you know, creating something like a podcast and then having it automatically turned into other content, repurposed as other content through the power of automation and AI, usually, is what we're talking about now.
And right? On that point, do you concur, or do you think there's dangers in that, or?
Well, no, I think it's probably a good idea. I'm a big fan in particular of podcasting, which was one of the things I wanted to talk about today. And there's several different reasons for that. But I also think that there's a place for the writing component, because I think that we think when we're writing and editing. And so I think that doing the writing is important as well. And so I think it's not just all about, you know, let's just get in a podcast, record it, and bang, there's your blog post, you know, have your VA turn it into a book.
Ironically, how meta. That's a very interesting point. That the writing is helping the thinking and helping grow that expertise. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, and I think that where you came out of left field with this was I said, look, I specifically don't want to talk about AI because I'm doing that on my new podcast, the AI Power Thought Leader. So for the Recognized Authority, I want to talk about some stuff that isn't totally AI focused. And you said, but is this just not irrelevant now? And that just hit me from left field. So I want to get into why you said that and what's the context of that.
Go for it. What's the context of that? And what's your response?
Well, that's it. So you said you were listening to, was it Perry Marshall talking about AI?
Perry Marshall. Many people know him. If not, he's a remarkable thinker and consultant, and business advisor. And he basically said the value of writing this is a paraphrase, so I may be inaccurate in some level here, but as I understood it, he said the value of being an author and writing a book is essentially going down in its perception month by month. And he gave the example of Amazon having a limit of only 3 books a day that each account can upload to Kindle, because there were instances seemingly of certain accounts uploading 30, 40, even 50 books a day. So when someone can type in some prompts, give it a few thoughts, and basically just have ChatGPT churning the stuff out, it completely or it starts to go down the channel of devaluing the perception of an author. Again, another friend of ours, Steve Gordon, one of his ripostes to that was creating this idea of a stamp, an organized stamp of legitimacy written by humans. I'd add written by humans, edited by AI, because I think there's a benefit in actually having an editor. I think we've both, in the last few years, particularly since, self-publishing kicked in, that one of the greatest problems with self-publishing is that people don't have a very good editor, whereas, back in the day, often a good editor just streamlines the thing. As a quick aside, the flip of that is business books on a shelf, where they should be a good in-depth, long-form, 40-page article or something. And instead, it's a 300-page book, because otherwise the perceived value is too low. So it's just full of filler, Anywho, riff on that.
Okay, riff on that. So the idea is that the proliferation of AI-generated content has caused Amazon to limit people to a mere 3 books published per day, which is nuts.
You are the author of and uploading 3 new books a day. Think about that. So you can still do it 3 days per day. That's 21 a week. That's the limit,
Right, and I thought I was pretty good writing a book in a month. So yeah,
there you go. You're still obviously going for quality though, which is a good sign.
So then the context of that is then as somebody who wants to publish and be seen as, and like I said, as an aspiring thought leader, then an authority in my field. If I want to be seen as all of that, does that invalidate the concept of having a book, or does this make publishing companies more relevant again? Because I think that they were starting to lose their relevance. So is a commercial publisher now more relevant again?
I don't know. This is part of it. I suspect an editor or some sort of signature, some sort of stamp of credibility will probably come back into that. One thing Perry was talking about, which was very interesting, was the flip side of having the book is that you're actually doing things like this. You're getting on live, but this / interactive webinar style, where you're actually fielding the questions live, because then people are going, that will shoot way up in appreciation rather than just the recorded word. Because the recorded word, as you said earlier, should be you condensing, compressing, and just improving and streamlining your thoughts and your unique value and insight. But then people are very soon, even now, are still going, well, how much of this was written by AI? How much is this actual person? Do they actually know this and believe this? Or is this just, hopefully with the uniqueness, it'll seem less ChatGPT. As you know, you can read something and tell it's kind of ChatGPT still, because it uses some of these linguistic hyperbole and silly phrases and stuff. But that'll get washed away in the next iteration, I'd imagine, if not the one after.
Yeah, I would say so. The output is getting much better.
And even Claude now is harder to spot because it's just better. But the point is still the same, is that it's being it in the real, walking the walk and talking the talk will very much be the differentiator. People being able to field questions live, that's kind of, for me, where an awful lot of the authority will go. But I think probably to start with, it'll still be, Alastair McDermott is the author of this book, that book, and the other book.
Yeah.
And to be honest, one of the things I really like about your book series is that they are concise. They're not 300 pages of filler, around 40 or 80 pages of good stuff. You've tightened it way down. I mean, when we worked together years ago, he used to always berate me about being way too wordy. So you were always very much an engineer when it came to communication, which was great.
Yeah, the benefits of the classical education, Al.
Indeed, yeah. And the benefits of your engineering background is like, cut straight to the point. But so I think there's still value there in reading the insights of an expert. Of course there are.
Yeah, so I mean, where it comes down to for me is, okay, so, I mean, it would be good for me personally if things like live streams started to become much more important, because I'm doing a lot of those already, and that's something I've already got a skill set around. So that would be good for me personally. Now, I'm thinking about the listener who wants to build authority and be seen as an expert in their field. Sure. And they're looking at this landscape of Amazon limiting people to 3 books a day, and they're saying, oh, well, I was thinking about writing a book next year. Is it worthwhile doing that now? I think it probably still is, because I think that if you're writing a book about, like, for a business audience, it's going to be business focused, it's going to be educational, and it's going to be probably around your process. And what you're doing there is you're documenting your process, really. Correct. And it helps you to formulate your thinking, and it helps you create all of these other assets as well. That, like anytime you write a chapter, that's also a blog post. That's also potentially a podcast episode, if we repurpose it the other direction. So I think that there's a lot of benefit in just going through that writing process. But it does, like what you said, and the kind of the paraphrase quote from Perry, like all of that does make me wonder about the value now of having my stuff up on Amazon. And I
cautiously agree and disagree. I think the nuance is, if you've several things there, it's the full picture. So think of it this way: when people still go to Google someone, they go, "Who is this guy?" Maybe they hear you as a guest on someone they already listens to a podcast. Is a very common thing, right? And they go, "Who is this guy? I kind of like his stuff. I like the way he spoke. I liked his tone. I liked his turn of phrase. I liked the way he was thinking about things, telling me new things about stuff I thought I already knew, yada, yada, yada," right? And then they click the link in the bio or whatever, or in the show notes, and they're looking at your website. Maybe they Google you. Remember Google? It's not gone yet. And all of a sudden, there's just pages and pages of content that you've created over years. And I have the strong feeling that that's the sort of marker where they go, oh, this person's been doing this for X amount of years. They have like 50 or 80 or 120 podcasts. They have 4 books on this. They've guested on, 28 podcasts or whatever. Do you see what I mean? They're looking at it in the round going, hold on a second. This guy is probably legit. They're putting all the pieces together. Whereas if they look someone up who has, 28 books on, 8 different topics, and no podcast guesting, no blog posting, they've been doing this for the last year, 18 months? I think then when you compare those two pictures, you're going, the first one probably knows far more about how to address my concerns, what I think is my unique issues, concerns, problems, yada, yada. Am I on the right track there? Do you reckon, or is there another issue
so.
there?
So, yeah, I think of that as when we publish anything out into the world, we're building this body of work, and this body of work is this increased surface area for people to encounter us. And it could be, like in Google. And I just Googled myself for fun because I haven't done that in a long time. And now I'm dominating, I think, for me and my name, I'm dominating, whereas before I would have been competing a bit with some people who have a similar name to me, with, different spelling. So I can see, I've got a lot of profile there. But yeah, it's, on the other hand, stuff like Google may become less relevant. And that's like we're already seeing it where people are now doing searches in ChatGPT or in tools like perplexity.ai, where people are doing searches there because they're getting better results than Google is giving. And I think that's one of the reasons why Google actually sat on their AI implementation and didn't roll it out until they were forced to, is because they knew that they would cannibalize their own search with their AI products, which is interesting. So, so like, is writing relevant? Is publishing relevant? I think it is because of the thinking process that it brings you through. I think having lots of content out in the world, I think that's important, because people will come across you and see, okay, yeah, like a friend of mine said, you can't fake 200 podcast episodes. Paddy, when he was on my podcast, and he had just hit 200. And so, like, I agree with that. But at the same time, if that's the case, and then people are churning out huge amounts, like vast amounts of content, and a lot of this Google is not going to be able to realize or detect as not human generated. It's not going to, like, the AI content is getting good enough that Google won't be able to tell the difference. And at that point, if people are putting 30 books a day up on Amazon, they're certainly creating massive websites as well.
Like there's something. It's the difference, I think, between asking a doctor and asking an actor playing a doctor about your health concerns, right? The actor playing a doctor will do a damn good job of sounding pretty convincing until you go a few questions deep. Right?
Right, yeah.
So, and this is again where the live interaction, where they're fielding live, fresh concerns. I was on a podcast a year or two ago where it was literally a question sent in by some of the listeners, because it was a live stream thing. And it was a live, like, let's do a case study. Let's just spend time literally giving free advice and consultancy to this person with this issue. And I think that sort of thing will become all the more powerful, because it's going so deep into the specific of expertise. And this is, again, the difference between whether you've edited a book, essentially, or curated a book versus written the thing. You either know it or you kind of skim read it. That's the level of difference. And it's one of these things, like they say, focus is the power of the 21st century, one of these great superpowers. And I think it probably is, because, as a friend was saying, if you can teach his kid one thing, it will be the ability to actually focus for blocks of time. And I was like, absolutely, that is, because already adults are losing the ability, unless they're in flow states, and that's a whole other, whole other conversation, because the same kid who supposedly has ADHD and yet all these different attention disorders is locked into playing a computer game for 10 hours straight.
Yeah.
Right. So, so there's something else going on there with focus and attention. Okay. But it is this idea of, are you going deep or are you going thin and broad and mass produce and more stuff? Or I suppose, not to sound too naff, but it's that kind of Bruce Lee quote. What was it he said? I don't fear the man who has 10,000 kicks. I fear the man who's practiced one kick 10,000 times. So it's the, and again, apologies for the bit naff going Bruce Lee there, but the analogy does fit, that it's the depth of expertise that matters, because then you're far more dexterous or flexible in its application. Whereas when you have a very thin read, thin understanding, I suppose there's a software parallel there where several people who were interviewing, a mutual friend of ours in Berlin was interviewing for other engineers. And as I said, you can find out pretty quickly, about 4 or 5 questions deep. And you can tell if someone was merely on a project, i.e. in the room, or if they led the project and they solved the problems, or did they just witness the problems being solved? Because their memory won't be the same of the two, and you'll be able to understand their thinking. They'll be able to remember that, because it's quite a challenging and emotional thing. It goes into memory, remember these things. But I feel that that's kind of the equivalent of where we're going with authority and expertise. Again, or am I off? Is there something else I'm missing here?
Yeah, no, I think you're on point there. I like the way, what worries me about this is I don't really know at this point.
Well, nobody really knows. That's why we're looking for kind of educated insights rather than just random guesses. So the question then is, where should we spend our time? Because we've got limited resources. So where do we spend our time? If we want to, like,
does it come back to this thing of building a personal brand? And that's not a term I really ever embraced, but I think that I'm going to have to embrace it more and more, because it seems to me that maybe that's the most important thing, is becoming known and kind of creating this personal brand, and even embracing the word influencer. And I'm not in the kind of the naff social media sense, but in the sense of a thought leader.
Yeah. Maybe it's for our generation, but you and I are both, or maybe it's the Irish cynicism, but we're both really put off by the words brands and influencer. Yeah. But they do mean specific things. And when we hear brand, I mean, just literally think of, for anyone else who's a bit like, eek, just think of, what do people think of when they think of you? That's it. What do you evoke? You know? Both in the experience as well as the physical output. You know, what are you known for? Like, whether you like or love McDonald's, you know, you see those golden arches, and you can nearly, you know what the feel of the furniture in there is going to, you know how bright it's going to be, you know, the smell in the air, you can tell. Even though each one is different, they're all the bloody same, right? So, and it's this, so what are you going to be known for? And how do you establish that? I suppose that's the next question, which brings us back to all of these mediums. So talk to me then about some of the pros and cons. Now, you're a big podcast fan, so am I. Do you want to go into quickly why that is, the benefits maybe of leading with the podcast?
Okay, so there's so many pros for me. So one is that if we go with the traditional podcasts, it's typically being listened to by people with headphones in, listening to you while they're doing something like gardening or doing the dishes or driving or something, right? So you have this uninterrupted time in their ear while they're at the gym or doing whatever they're doing, and they're just listening to you talking about whatever it is with whoever you're talking about. But they're interested enough to give you some time out of their schedule and dedicate it and attention, and that's what it is. And so and that creates this very strong connection. And so I think that's huge, just that part of it. And I also record video, and we're recording video today, and I'm going to put this up as a video because the YouTube has become the largest platform for people to consume podcasts. Now, I think that a lot of those people who are consuming podcasts on YouTube are not actually looking at the screen or have it running in the background.
So you used to do this years ago, and I was like, what? You have YouTube on? It's like, yeah, when I'm cleaning my office or when I'm organizing my files and stuff. I'm like, oh, right, okay.
Yeah. Because you don't.
Is that true, even, by the way? YouTube it's bigger than Spotify and Apple and Google.
Yeah, as far as I know, the latest stats show that YouTube is, and I'll put links in the show notes for this.
Point is the same. Podcasts are big still.
Podcasts are big, and well, the interesting thing is, so I have heard people say, you know, there's too many podcasts already. The number of podcasts is the number of active podcasts is actively dropping at the moment. So we have less podcasts now active than we did 3 or 4 years ago, and so it's fascinating, particularly given that the listenership of podcasts is growing. And I think what's happening is more and more people are listening to the biggest podcasts, and they're getting into podcasting. Podcast apps have been embedded in car dashboards now. And so when you buy a new car, you know, you can play a podcast while you're driving. So all of that is built in, and that's growing the listenership as well. So so it's a growing medium in that sense. You have this connection with the listener. But then there's these other things that you can do with a podcast. So, for example, we're also doing video. When you do video, you can repurpose that content in more different ways. In particular, you can repurpose it up onto social media in the form of short video clips. And those tend to get
simpler and simpler to do. Yeah. Yeah.
And again, with those AI tools that we don't want to mention because we don't make this podcast all about AI.
No, it's hard to avoid.
It does help.
It does creep in, but it's in the background of this conversation. But so those are the pros. What are the cons?
No, not finished with the pros.
Oh, sorry.
Not even close. So another thing that you can do with a podcast is you can platform yourself. So you can be the expert on your podcast. And that's something that I've done before on my podcast with solo episodes and by asking you to come on as a co-host and interview me on a topic. And that makes up for the fact that when you have an interview show, quite often you as the interviewer, you're platforming the other person, the guest. And so what you can do is you can reverse that so that you're platformed. So you're platforming yourself, but then you can do the other thing I talked about, which is interview other people. So you can interview and connect with other people in your field. So you can build relationships with people. So for example, I've interviewed Alan Weiss, Chris Doe, David C. Baker, Ron Baker, Rochelle Moulton, Jonathan Stark. All these people I've interviewed on my podcast. I've gotten to know them. I've chatted them. I was on Rochelle's podcast last night. We just did a recording for hers. That's going to be out in a couple of weeks. So there's all of these things. So you're building relationships with all of these people. And then what happens is you are seen on the same level as the people who you're talking with. And that's a psychological thing where people, if they see you in a certain circle of people all the time, they assume that you're at that level, whether you are or whether you're not. Now, I would like to think that eventually you do get to that level because you're hanging around with those people for long enough and talking with those kind of people. Then the other thing is you can actually use your podcast for lead generation by interviewing or chatting with your ideal client. So you can say, Mr. Prospective Client, I would love to have you come on my podcast to talk about your journey, what you've learned in this industry, tell us some more stories, things like that. And so what you can do is you can build relationships with people. I'm not saying necessarily try and do a hard sales pitch, and definitely don't do that in the green room before or after the interview, but you can start to build a relationship with somebody. And so you can use your podcast as content-based networking. And so what you're doing is you're getting to know people and build relationships. And then apart from all of that, you can take all of that content and repurpose it all out. Now, the other thing that you can do that I have done in the past is you can also use it as a way of doing research. So you could say, okay, I want to write a book on a topic, or I want to do some research around a particular area. I'm going to go find the experts who are in this area, and I'm going to interview them on that topic. And it's basically going to be a research call, but we're going to record it and broadcast it as a podcast. And so you get to repurpose this. And you can also do that with research in a new market with prospective clients. And so what you're doing is you're building a relationship, doing research for a book, and creating content. So you're kind of three birds with one stone kind of thing. So, and you've got all of this content that you can now repurpose a million different ways with all of our AI tools and all of the even the non-AI tools that we use for repurposing. So I don't know if I've exhausted all of the possible pros, but I think there's a lot. Yeah. Maybe one of the last ones
worth mentioning.
Well, so maybe one of the last pros, and then we can get into cons. One of the last pros is it can be as simple as getting on a Zoom call and just recording it.
I mean, that's what I've done for ages. Yeah. It's not amazing, but as I said, with a lot of podcast listeners, they're listening while they're doing something else. So your audio just has to be clear. It doesn't have to be BBC quality level, as I discovered many years ago.
I would like it to be as clear as possible because I interviewed the guy who did the science on audio quality, Professor Norbert Schwartz, and they found that the better quality audio made you seem smarter, more likable, and your work more important, and less quality audio makes you seem less smart, less likable, and your work less important. So I think the audio quality is super important.
It makes sense, but it needs to be above a certain level.
Yeah, so there is a bar there. So, but yeah, it can be as simple as getting on a Zoom call and having a conversation with somebody. And that's a great place to start. And so I would highly encourage people to do that. In terms of the cons, well, I think that it's somewhat time consuming. If you want to do the editing, if you want to edit it, and it depends on how you do that, you'll have to either learn how to do it yourself or you'll have to pay to outsource that to somebody else.
Don't do it, folks. Get an editor. Because I did that for a friend's podcast years ago, and it was fine, and I knew how to do it, but no. When I started my own, it was like, that's the task I hand out. But anyway, yes, it's something you can outsource relatively affordably. It's
something you can outsource, or you can avoid it completely like I do by recording live to tape and saying, we're recording live, we're not editing, and that's the way it is. And so I'll probably do on this one because we happen to be recording this, but I'm considering this live to tape. I'll do a quick top and tail on it,
sure,
but I won't do much editing on it.
Very good. So what would be the other, because, some other mediums might be the classic one. Is blogging literally just now, as I say, snippets, AI, get my GPT to take the transcript and write 3 blog posts out of that conversation?
Well, you could
is there value to doing it on its own?
So
Because you still blog
well,
on your own, don't you? Just for the sake
yeah,
of it.
if we're talking, so again, it goes back to I think of writing as a form of thinking, and so my blogging, where I blog something and I don't have any associated podcast episode or anything like that. That's typically just exploring a thought and helping me to articulate something that I believe. And so sometimes I have my blog hooked up on my email system, so it automatically generates a draft email, which I can then go in and tidy up and send as an email to my list, as a broadcast email. So yeah, I do still like the concept of blogging. I think it's important, and I would tie the blog in with email. And I have dropped the ball on my email a number of times in the past, and I've done it again because I was writing a daily email there for a while, and I stopped doing that. So I think that it's very easy to get out of the habit of doing that, but it's a great way to explore ideas and think. So I think that the writing element is important for me personally. So we're talking about podcasting. We've kind of segued into talking about writing and blog posts.
How about writing a book then? I mean, we were talking all around it, but
yeah, I mean, this comes back to me of, I wanted to have a book that I can drop on somebody's desk and it has the thud factor, it makes a thud when it hits the desk. You want a book that's solid, and like for me, the word count is like 30, 35, 40,000 words, something like that. So it's substantial. So it's there's value captured in there, but at the same time, I wouldn't want it to be seen, or I'd hate to get a book review that said this should have been a blog post. That that would be
I have a feeling, just returning and going and completing the loop a little bit. I think that's also a factor with when people read the book, that if it's just, even now, maybe for the next few years, you have to remember, ChatGPT is an aggregate of the thought that is in its data. So it will say interesting things that one of the things it's great at is saying things that is obvious to the data, but not obvious to the human due to our biases and whatnot, right? And that can be helpful. But if you're getting it to write a book, and this is one of the reasons why an awful lot of people are a bit disappointed and underwhelmed, trough of despair stuff with ChatGPT, was because it's so average. Like, what it spits out is literally, by definition, is average. So do you want to stand over a book that's average, or do you want to stand over a book that you're damn proud of and you're like, this is my thinking on this. This is my unique approach.
This is where it goes back to, for me, how much input that you have. And when I say how much input, I mean literally like the quantity of input that you give it. And so I have created custom GPT for myself, which I just call my books, and it's private to me. Nobody else can access it, but it's an instance of ChatGPT that I can go in and use, and it has the text of all of my books. It has the text of every blog post I've ever written, and it's got a bunch of other stuff that I've written. It's just in there. There's probably 200,000 words or so, and it's all me. And when I use that to write stuff, it comes out as much closer to me than if I was to use ChatGPT without all of that input. The other thing that I personally do is I use transcripts, or I use dictation. So I'll use dictation a lot, where I'm giving ChatGPT the input and asking it then to reword that and rewrite that as the output. So if I'm asking it to write a 1,000 word blog post, for example, if I was to do that, so first of all, I probably wouldn't, because I'd probably write a 1,000 word blog post myself, just because I would find that by the time I got ChatGPT to write something that I was happy with, I probably would have written it manually myself. But then the other thing is, if I was going to get it to write a 500 word blog post, I would probably dictate, I would probably dictate about the same amount of words in as I would expect to get out. So my input and output would be roughly equivalent. Maybe dropping as much as 50% of the input would be 50% of the output, something like that. But probably not more, not less than that. So what I'm saying is, I'm giving it all of the thoughts that are in my head about the topic, and then just getting it to reformulate my thinking, rather than getting it to write it from scratch on very little input. Like I think the example that you could take would be, if you got a list of keywords from search engine optimization, you said, write me a blog post for every one of these keywords. That would be the total opposite of what I'm talking about. Exactly. I'm talking about giving it a lot of input. And that's where I think it's different.
Yeah, as you said, that's a beautiful example. Just that you're putting in and guiding it and using it as a helpful little advisor of, oh, you could say it better this way, you could say it better that way, if you want to try and think of it as a person. But you're not doing, here's 15 headlines, or not even headlines, just sample headlines. Make hooky headlines and, 1,000-word posts to follow. I mean, that's the kind of churning out mass production nonsense that I think we're all already wary of.
So yeah.
On that note,
we were talking through the different, I guess, formats, medium, platform, maybe, and podcast, and then writing, and using AI for writing. One that I think right now is going to be important and may in the future be less important is video. And the reason for that is I think the AI video generation tools are getting better and better, and it's getting harder to figure out if it's not a real live video from a real human being who's just recorded themselves. I have seen people using video generation tools where they put some video of themselves in, and then they can generate video of themselves saying anything. And it's still
not
also
worrying.
Yeah, it's worrying for many, many reasons. But if we just stick to the positive and say, okay, so what can you use that for positively? Well, for example, I could take the RSS feed of my blog and I could feed that in and say, record me speaking every one of these blog posts, and have it generate high quality video of me looking like I'm reading or saying all of those in a natural way. I think that is still a couple of years away, probably not much longer than that. But I think that for right now is the time to use video to build a personal brand, because AI still hasn't really quite got that right. And I think that if you are not on the video bandwagon, get on it really quick, because if you don't do that, I think that, you'll miss the boat, and there'll be a lot of AI generated video that you won't be able to tell if it's a real person or not. And so now is the time to take advantage of that. That's the way I think about video. But I also know that video is very hard to do. Like, apart from all the technical stuff of, camera, lighting, sound, all that, there's a barrier to people doing it. People that, are worried about their appearance. They're worried about delivery, looking at the camera. I try and look at the camera as much as possible, but a lot of the time I'm looking down at my screen, or you're slightly off center on the screen, so I'm looking down at you now instead of at the camera. So there's all of that kind of stuff as well. And there's all these little barriers to doing video, but I think it's still crucial that we do it, because it's the way to make that human connection. And that's why the eye contact, looking at the camera, you're making eye contact with the viewer. That's why that part is important. But I think that AI will be able to replicate that in a few years' time. So, I think I would encourage people to do video. And it can be as simple, and this is a service that I offer, it can be as simple as getting on a Zoom call. One of the things I do with some of my clients is we get on a Zoom call and I interview them about their topic, and we turn that into videos for their channel and for their website. And the reason why we do that is because we can then repurpose it in all these different ways, and it also saves time. It means you're not you're not sitting in front of a camera looking at it and trying to figure out what to say. It's much easier when you have somebody talking to you and interviewing you. And this goes back to the power of the interview for me.
Big time. And that's something that's coming through again from Harry and from what we're saying and you're saying, is being able to do it live. That's a key thing. Then you're walking the walk, you're talking the talk, and even if it's a live recording, it's still being done live. Whereas, as we said, that maybe what would you say, some of those other mediums are going to be suffering that little bit more in perceived value.
Yeah, so I don't know where do we wrap it up from here, Al. I think that we've come full circle in that we're back. Well, we're back talking about AI again. Even though we intended not to talk about AI today, or at least I did.
Well, what's the underlying message then? What's the key uniting message?
I think the key thing here for me is that we still need to create content. We need to create high quality content that has human insights that AI doesn't yet have access to. Now, as more and more people publish, and the AI is then trained on what's out there, the AI will learn. And so in order to stay ahead and have our own insights that are unique to us, we're going to have to stay ahead of the game. I mean, does that mean we don't publish into AI? Like we don't take our thoughts and allow them to be trained on? I mean, that was one of the issues with ChatGPT, where they were taken to court, was because all of these authors said, hey, my book was clearly and obviously used to train your model without my permission. I didn't give you my intellectual property rights.
It's the same with artists and designers for the visual ones, DALL-E and all the rest of it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, so do we try and keep our stuff out of those systems? Or on the flip side, do we want our content to be in there so that when somebody uses it like a search engine, that it actually finds us and mentions us as the if it does mention us as a contributor to that.
We're still talking about AI here, but that sounds like one of the compromises, is because it's usually only a snippet of information, so it's probably could be considered fair use as long as it's acknowledged, which ChatGPT doesn't do yet. Whereas if it actually accurately acknowledges, I got this bit from here and that bit from there, then it's much harder to actually object because you're being recognized. Mm-hmm. And that's putting the recognition in the recognized authority. Boom. But
very nice.
No, but look, I think the main point is writing tends to clarify your thinking about these things, whether it's in short pieces or whether it's more of a book. And that allows you to speak and field questions live, unprompted, which is what increasingly that human-to-human interaction will have higher and higher perceived value.
So I wonder then, will there be more and more value to live in-person conferences? Because that's where
that's a really good question.
Where for now we can see that we're really talking with a real person. I think we are getting closer to the age of human replica robots, but we're still quite a bit away with that technology. That's at least another decade away. But
I mean, in a virtual sense, as you said, you can now train it to sound like your voice. Mm-hmm. Now, it's far from perfect, but again, look where ChatGPT was 18 months ago. So these things jump up really quite rapidly. So,
and by the way,
the best time to
ChatGPT hasn't improved in the last 12 months. Now they've published, closed betas and things of Sora and showing off some of their other stuff, but they actually haven't published their next version. And it'll be really interesting when they come out with ChatGPT 5 or 4.5 or whatever they're going to call it. I think it's going to be a big step forward again. And at that point, it might be writing and generating content that we can't distinguish from human. So, we need to just be aware that this stuff is changing that quickly. So, okay. So, what I wanted to talk today about was, what platforms or what formats should we choose as people who want to build authority? And we ended up talking a lot about AI, and I think it's because AI is just ubiquitous in it now. It's a bit like talking about, I don't know, it's a bit like talking about work without using a computer or something, Right. It's just ubiquitous. How do you feel about that?
It's hard. It's extremely hard to avoid, and burying one's head in the sand. As we said, look, in that, you have the early adopters and it jumps up to elation and all this sort of stuff. Huge expectations and the trough of despair, which is where we are now, because an awful lot of people have tried ChatGPT and been kind of both impressed with it on initial play, and then you go a little bit deeper, and it's like, oh, that's crap, and oh, that's really rubbish, and that didn't save me any time at all, and blah, blah, blah. And it's just that what they call the trough of despair. I mean, we had this with internet, with Web 1.0 and 2.0, where huge expectations drop down to the reality, and then the expectations are still low when the reality is actually creeping up to what the expectations were in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when people are in that sort of illusion, delusion, that, oh, this thing, I have years in my field before it really rocks it. It's like, no, you don't. This is like the Ice Age. The Ice Age didn't happen over 1,000 years, 10,000 years. It arrived, they say now, at about 5-10 years or something. It literally went from normal to huge amounts of ice. Utter disruption to human communities who are anywhere in those zones, right? But it's going to be similar in an awful lot of work, of industries. And the more you can get ahead of your peers, the better you're going to be positioned to not just survive, but actually thrive. These tools should be your ally. As you keep saying, they should be, leaning into them. Leaning into their use in a responsible, ethical way that enhances your workflow, but clarifies your thinking and improves the benefits that you bring to your clients. Yeah,
I think that the only, the thing that I fear for people is where they feel like, oh, I've got AI fatigue. I'm just hearing about AI everywhere. And so I'm just going to shut off to it. And I think that's like saying I've got electricity fatigue, or I've got, automobile fatigue. If you were a farrier or a blacksmith in the 1890s, it's like, no,
exactly.
these things are coming, and it's much better to have some understanding of what's happening and knowing how these tools work. I think even though it's the pace of it is so fast, and there's so many new things being announced every single day, and so many new tools being built on top of these tools, that it feels like just this tsunami of overwhelm. But that doesn't mean it's not important to go and learn how to use these tools and get some basic understanding of the basics of how they work, because it's like, it's essential. It's you don't want to be the business in 1980s who says, no, we're not going to look at these computer things. We're going to continue using our paper-based system, and all of our competitors are just going to wipe us out.
They go to Lotus and then to Microsoft Excel, which was in exponential increase in productivity in the world.
Yeah.
It was a huge increase in wealth was tied to Microsoft Excel and Lotus 1, 2, 3, seemingly.
Yeah.
So I believe. Anyway, the point was the same, was don't bury your head in the sand, but also don't get too afraid of the stuff either, or too terrified, or overly crazy optimistic either.
Yeah.
And on that note,
thank you, Al. I appreciate you not talking about AI with me today.
Sorry.
But this was fun. So so overall, to wrap it all back up in a bow, I think that you should create content in a platform or medium that you like working in, and then you should try and repurpose it into other platforms. And I particularly like the multi-purpose, the kind of multi-approach of podcast, because it's so flexible. But I really do think that there's a place for writing as well.
Definitely.
Awesome. Al McBride, where can people find you if they want to check you out?
Just go to almcbride.com. Plenty of stuff there.
Cool. And follow
check out
Al
my podcast, Dealing with Goliath. I also have a new book coming out very soon called Dealing with Goliath, The Psychological Edge of Negotiation.
And I've been helping Al with editing this, actually. And I'm delighted to say he's going to be publishing it under my new imprint, Authority Press. So I'm really excited about that. And maybe that is where the logo part of the publishing will be important, because it'll be somebody else, an external mark of approval. So I think that that is where the publishing part comes back into it, and the kind of the commercial publishers or the external approval. So Al, thank you so much for being on the show today.
No worries. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to The Recognized Authority with Alastair McDermott. Subscribe today and don't miss an episode. Find out more at therecognizedauthority.com.